Okay.
Okay, so just to get started really quickly, I am Penny Beeman with You for Positive Love, and we have,
I'm Cindy Campbell of Cindy Campbell Dog Training.
and so we kind of work together to coordinate these service dog handler chats. And so we have just a couple of really simple ground rules. I know that we only have one person here right now, and she's kind of new. So our basic ground rules are, we don't worry about it so much when there's like less than 4 or 5 people. But when we get, more than that, it helps to follow the rules of raise your hand when you have something to chat. We want it to be flexible and we want everybody's opinion to come through. So if you do have a question, just raise your hand, and whichever admin is kind of running things at that point will turn the floor over to you. You can also, that's especially helpful if we're working on, if what you want to add applies to what we're talking about right this very second. And if you have something you want to add that's not really what we're talking on, but goes along with our general topic, you can type it into the chat box and we will get as much of those things as we can. So tonight our topic is the difference between, is it legal to take your service dog places versus is it ethical to take your service dog places? And I'm going to kind of throw something at Cindy because we didn't really talk about this and it's her night. But I think it would probably be helpful, and she may disagree with me, but maybe we should start looking at like the puppy end of things and
That's where I was going to
progress
start.
through the stages to the older, like retiring type dog.
That's where I was going to start with puppy, and then we'll go from there depending on how much room, how much time we have.
Right. Awesome.
So,
I'm going to mute and let you take over then.
okay, just in case you don't know, there is an emoji on the emojis for raising your hand. There, you can raise your hand on the emojis and put your hand back down, and it gives us a little bit more of a visual cue that you've raised your hand, because it moves your position on the screen. So we'll start. Basically, what I was wanting to cover was the who, what, when, where, why, and how of public access, of legal versus ethical, and why it's important to discuss what's best for the dog versus what is best, what is legal. So I'm in most states have some form of public access for service dogs in training. And where the state I'm in, California, has case law stating that if you're going to be in a place of that's of a public accommodation that's not pet friendly, and you have your dog with you, it has to be for training. Does not say how old the dog has to be, but it says you have to be actively training your dog. So, what are some things we would consider when we're considering training our dog? Is the dog completely potty trained? Is it 6 months old or older, so we know it's got bladder control? Does the dog have some leash manners? Doesn't have to have a perfect heel, but does it walk on loose leash most of the time? Where are you taking the dog? Is it someplace where the dog's likely to get, where there's likely to be issues with dogs? Like PetSmart probably isn't your, PetSmart on Saturday is probably not your best first place to take your dog that you go inside, because even though it's pet friendly, that's the problem. You never know what is going to be inside PetSmart. Literally, I've seen all kinds of stuff in there. I train in there on a regular basis. Versus say Tractor Supply, which there's much fewer dogs, or a hardware supply. And should you even be going, or do you start public access training when they're 8 weeks old and you bring them home and you put them in a stroller or carry them someplace? What works for you? Because what works for one puppy may not work for another puppy. I've had very few dogs that I've done full-on public access training with, starting as a young puppy, that and had to worry about it. But all my other dogs have been, perfectly fine to take out in public and not worry about how they're going to behave. It's a lot of the, in my opinion, a lot of the puppy training for PA happens at home, not necessarily in a restaurant or a mall or someplace, although some people like to train there. Penny, do you have any comments on this? Because I'm kind of fumbling right now. Unmute, please.
Yeah, so I did just raise my hand. That's why I was still muted, because I lowered my hand instead of unmuting. But anyway, so it is important, I think, to kind of just mention that, because we said the topic was ethics versus law, we have to at least mention ADA law, which is the big one that covers everybody in the United States, and how states can vary from state to state. And I know you already touched on California, which is why I kind of wanted to touch on Michigan. But first, looking at federal law.
It does not cover service dogs in training, so it does not cover.
Correct. It covers service dogs, but it defines a service dog as being potty trained, having at least one task, and under handler.
Under control of the handler.
So I can say without a doubt that by 6 months of age, Azul met that criteria. Now, was he trained? Obviously not, but he met the criteria, which is what brings me to what Michigan state law used to be. Thankfully, it's recently changed. But Michigan used to be one of 4 states that did not allow in training access in any way, shape, or form. Like, it was just left out. It wasn't said there wasn't access, but it didn't mention access ever in any of the laws. Kind of happened accidentally with the law change because it was covered years and years ago. But so that meant in order to even take Azul to like calmer, quieter places, like say a doctor's appointment that my doctors were supportive of, we had to fall back on the ADA law of that criteria being met, because it was the only way to do it in my state at that time. So I think when you do that, that's when you're kind of like rubbing that line of, is it legal or is it ethical? Was it legal to take Azul at 6 months old in public places? It was totally legal. Is it legal to take a 16-week-old puppy in many places if service dog in training is part of your state and local laws? Totally legal. But you also have to consider where it is you're taking that puppy, and do they have the sufficient amount of training for that particular environment?
And do they have a sufficient amount of emotional maturity to handle that environment?
Right. So at 6 months old, when I was taking Azul into a doctor's appointment, they were the short little appointments. For example, at that time, I was going in once a month for a monthly shot. So it was, a 5, at most 10-minute long appointment at the end of the day when the waiting room was pretty much empty. And I had that permission from that provider, not that they really had to give me permission because we were ADA compliant and legal at that point. But so I was using that as a training session once a month to go in and spend 5 minutes sitting in the waiting room, and then walk in, get my shot, walk back out, quick. It wasn't an hour-long appointment or anything. So we were using it as a training environment in a situation where, or in a state where in training access wasn't covered, but he met the ADA definition of a service dog at that time. So I think that's kind of like where it's a fine line, I say, between ethical and not ethical. Because if I were asking that 6-month-old puppy to hold an hour-long downstay for, x-rays or something to that extent, that would not be ethical for the puppy. If I were asking everyone else in that waiting room to deal with a puppy that was antsy and kept shifting position because they weren't able to hold the downstay for the time that you were in there, that would be unethical, considering like all the people around us.
It would be impolite if nothing else.
Right. And, so I think you have to consider that when you're taking a young dog, whether you're covered by state service dog and training laws, or you're in a state where it doesn't, and you meet the minimum ADA requirements, you have to consider all of the other pieces of the puzzle when you're working a young dog.
Or also the other thing to consider would be if you're on federal land where it applies. So like if you have a dog that's a service dog in training that doesn't have a task, and you go into, say, I'll use Yosemite National Park as an example, you're not covered by California state law, you're covered by the ADA, it's whatever the Park Service has, it's not even the ADA.
Yeah, there's a different one for federal land.
And they don't have a service dog and training clause. However, they do have lots of different ways of handling pets, because lots of people take pets to Yosemite. So there's opportunities, but you may not get to hike. So whereas if you have a task trained service dog, you can hike. But another example would be when we went to Hoover Dam, and we would have had to leave Nick in the trailer when we went to Hoover Dam and not been able to get out, or not be able to get out and walk around, but he had tasks, he was trained. And even though we were on federal property, he had a task and he was perfectly capable of handling the situation that we were in. Even though at that point, I would not have considered him a fully trained, I personally would not have considered him as a fully trained service dog. But
I think that's kind of where we wanted to go tonight with the conversation of ethical versus legal.
mhm.
Are there other situations?
Well, I think
Probably one of my pet peeves, because I think it's unethical, especially with young puppies, is taking that puppy into a grocery store or a Walmart, something like that, as some of their very first PA training environments. Because I think you need to kind of work your way up to those. You want your dog to be rock solid in other areas before you go to restaurants, grocery stores, whatever. So it's not age related. It's more proofing the behaviors in so many other environments before you get there.
it's also whether they're emotionally equipped to handle it. I would add PetSmart and Petco to that list, even though they're pet friendly, because it's a lot to ask a puppy to sit in a cart. Especially what I see is people doing it the first day they got their dog. Saw a dog Thursday when I was there that was in the cart. The lady had literally just picked it up from the shelter, and the first stop before going home was PetSmart to get supplies for the puppy, to get supplies.
That happens more often than you'd think too. That happens a lot with pets and service dogs both.
Mm-hmm.
So much opposed to that, and that's the point of these discussions, is we can have varying different opinions. We're definitely not legal experts. We know our interpretation of the law, and we both have
I also think it depends on the
public
pet
places.
store that you take them to, because a PetSmart near you is going to be significantly less busy than My PetSmart.
I was just gonna say, I'd much rather see that brand new puppy that's, you know, under 16 weeks old, that's being carried through a pet store in that 5 to 10 minute outing that that person feels safe for doing it, than say the 4 or 5 month old puppy that now that person is expecting them to heel the whole way through the store and not sniff anything and, you know, maintain their manners that they've been able to get at the park and the hardware store and everywhere else in that high distraction environment.
Yeah, and then,
Rather see the, you know, the 8-week-old puppy there, as long as it's done safely, the, you know, as far as shots and all of that, than I would the
well,
young
yeah, and it's,
dog that's not mature enough to handle that kind
that particular PetSmart gets a fair number of brand new dogs and puppies brought in because they have the vet clinic in there.
Mhm.
And so they're coming in to get their vaccinations. The other thing is we have to think about what we expect of our dogs, especially with different situations. So Nick was attacked as a puppy, and his behavior has changed significantly since that episode. And I've been dealing with it, with all the fallout of this. And it's given me a lot of pause and thought and concern about how long am I going to work on fixing this particular issue. And he happens to be a high drive dog on top of it. Where in all other aspects, he's a great service dog. So there's legal versus ethical issues with him, just on, you know, how much public access does he get, because he needs public access to be trained. Well, I can manage him. I've been managing him. I don't let him get out of my control. I can refocus him. And if I can't refocus him, I can at least keep him, you know, with me and not causing problems for other people and get him calmed down. It's not something we like to deal with or have to like to discuss, but the reality of the situation is, you know, every dog goes through some period of, how would you describe it, Penny? Adolescence, boisterousness?
crazy adolescence where distractions are
Mhm.
and
And
the lack of self-regulation or impulse control is
if you have any kind of
not the dog's fault.
if you have any kind of incident happen during that period, it just makes it 10 times harder to get the dog through that period. And it's taken me a lot longer than I expected with Nick. Plus he's I got him, then 2 weeks later, we went on full lockdown, shelter in place with COVID. We went on it before New York State did. I think we may have been before New York City even. And they were trying to terrorize us out here, even though we're not nearly as densely packed as New York City. But it comes down to that comes down to a legal/ethical issue on handling, because I don't intend to get rid of this dog. And I intend to fix the issue, but at what point, at what cost? And when do you say, okay, he's just not going to make it for public access training, but I need him but I'm showing him at dog shows and he does have tasks. So technically he meets the definition, as long as I don't let him get into it with another dog. You know, that becomes an ethical discussion. And it's something that just, you know, if you post something in most dog groups, in most service dog groups, about your dog doing anything, lunging at another dog, it's automatically, your dog's aggressive, your dog needs basically the equivalent of a dog psych eval, it needs drugs, you need to stop public access, you know, it can't make it ever as a service dog. Well, if you weren't there to see what the dog did, you're not really equipped to make that judgment, because each, episode is different. And, a lunge for play can look an awful lot like a lunge for, I want to eat you.
Even as a behavior consultant, which I am, hearing another person describe a particular behavior, you can't always tell. And I mean, I've worked with a lot of clients via Zoom where I'm going based on what they've done or videos they've shown me. And I've had countless clients say, my dog is aggressive because, and then they happen to get a video of it and show it to me. And I'm like, wait a minute, see this? He wants to play. Well, yeah, but he's barking and lunging, so I don't trust him to play. So you have to kind of
You also have to look at the
the dog
situation.
and the emotions behind what's driving the behavior before you completely rule out a dog. Me, I'm more than willing to work with a dog for a while, but that's going to be a personal handler decision as to how much time and effort they want to put into a dog. If I can flip it just a little bit more extreme, and I don't really want to get into the senior stage, which is where my dog is now. But so Cam, my other dog, so not my working public service dog, Cam is very dog reactive and very men reactive. And while I can handle and control him in any environment, because we have worked together for so long that he has a really nice heel and trust that to be our safe spot, it would still be unethical for me to work him in a public environment because his anxiety would go so high. And anxiety is not one of my issues. So I don't really struggle with anxiety, although, I mean, it can happen with a migraine here and there, but it's not my problem. I don't think that, so the difference between a dog that is playfully trying to pull toward other dogs is it's still an emotional reaction we want to work on and we want to train, but it's much easier to train that situation, to change that emotion and teach them how to control it versus a dog that is just perpetually anxiety ridden like Cam is.
Right.
Will be. And now that he's getting older, he's on the downward hill of things and it's getting even worse. But we have to, that's, I think, is where we have to use that to base our consideration of, is it ethical to work this dog? He is task trained. So, I mean, legally, he would meet the ADA definition for a service dog.
More importantly, he meets the HUD
Fair
definition.
to work him in public environments. Wouldn't be fair to him.
But Penny, he meets the FHA HUD definition of a service dog. He's task trained.
Yes, that he does too.
And so that, sometimes that's actually benefit, not that, I mean, obviously, if we have the option of a public access trained dog, we want that, but having a task trained dog, sometimes having a task trained dog is beneficial in our housing situations as well.
Right.
Especially
that's just it. Yes.
Even if they only task once a month.
I can use Cam at home. I can use Cam on hikes in our rural environment and have that be totally ethical because he's comfortable there. He's familiar with the environment. And that allows my public access service dog to be a dog for a little while. He goes to bed very early every night. My public access service dog goes to bed very early every night with my husband. And I can do that without too much worry, knowing that Cam is here should I drop something and need a retrieve, because he can do it. Or should I suddenly get dizzy and need some stability, I know that Cam is going to be there for that. So I would not consider it ethical to work him in a public environment, he's totally ethical to work at home and in our rural environments. So I think that's kind of that fine line of you have to figure out case by case per dog and where they're comfortable and would they make other people in the environment you're in uncomfortable. So Cam being a German Shepherd, German Shepherds often look aggressive. If he did happen to bark or lunge, he would scare 99% of the world's population. So taking him knowing that he's anxious and not comfortable in an environment, if he did even just a slight bark, that could be threatening to other people as well. And I don't want that in a public access service dog for me.
I'm going to circle back to Nick, being a little self-centered here. So when Nick started having his lunging barking issues, he was doing it out of fear and aggression. And this weekend, I was over in Carmel by Monterey, enjoying the cool weather since it's 100+ degrees here. And what I noticed was most of, I'd say 99% of what Nick's interactions with other dogs were smiley face type interactions and sniffy type things, wanting to play, versus where he would have been a year and a half ago, where he would have been aggressive and trying to eat them. And to me, it's a vast improvement. I still think I still, I'm wanting to be that perfect dog handler that we all want to be. And I still think he should be doing better than he is at the moment, but he's doing the best that he can in the situations that he can. But it's encouraging to see, when you watch your dog and you watch their behavior, it's encouraging to see them go from, I don't have confidence, I was attacked and now I'm afraid, to now everybody's my best friend. I think part of that is hanging out with labs, but it really is something that's encouraging to see.
I'm totally with you on that. I mean, I would definitely encourage most people, especially if the dog is reactive before age 2, because most dogs, at least for a month or two, are going to have some reactivity during their teenage stage. For most of them, it's more than a month or two. Even
Yeah.
a dog who has been rock solid in PA for ages, he's just over 2 now. But in outdoor environments with dogs that he didn't know would bark or lunge because he wanted to go play with them so badly. And he's taken work to, get him to realize that outdoor is no different. We see a dog, we can look, but we're keeping our distance and we're not engaging with the dog unless it's one of our already known friends. So he does really well. Being a dog trainer, I take him with me to a lot of different dog clients face to face. And so he might be excited for the first 3 or 4 minutes, but then he calms down and will do anything I want, including task if I need him to, around that dog that he's only seen 3 or 4 minutes. So he has a couple of minutes of spazziness, and that's because he's still young. I think it's important that people keep that in mind in the teenage stage, that all teenagers are going to have a stage where they're reactive, whether it's fearfully reactive or overexcited reactive, it's going to happen.
And if something bad happens in that fear period, it's going to take a lot longer to fix that issue than if it happens not during the fear period. And Nick just had a perfect trifecta of events happen in a fear period. And that brings us to what is my next topic, and that is career changing a dog. A lot of people call it washing a dog, but I really much prefer the guide dogs of the blind's term for it, which is career changing, because even if they career change to being a pet, that's still a career for a lot of dogs.
Right.
And
implies they flunked out. Washing implies that they went on to a different purpose.
Yeah. So, or retiring, it could be a career change. It could be retiring. Like my Great Pyrenees is semi-retired. I'd say she's 99% retired. She doesn't go out in public, even though she's perfectly capable of maintaining herself in public and managing her manners and her behavior and just being the world's most friendly dog. She doesn't have the hips for it, so I don't want to put her through it. But she helps me around the house, especially when I'm dizzy or tired or need somebody just to put my hands on for a second so I don't fall over. Know where to do it, know how to do it, and know how to not hurt her in the process. So she was transitioned to retirement pretty much as soon as I found out she had hip dysplasia. Nick was planned for pretty much at the time that I found out she had hip dysplasia. I started looking for puppies, and it was within a few months that I got Nick. But right now we're at a crossroads because it's been a year and a half and we're still dealing with some lunging and barking, and I'm working diligently with him. I'm determined to conquer it because I don't think he's a mean dog. I don't think he has any issues with wanting to harm things. I think he's just a curious dog, and I think he is aware of a lot more than maybe I should have, than maybe I would like him to be aware of. And teaching him to mind his business has been a challenge. However, the progress I've seen has been tremendous in spite of the challenges, but there's times I want to just go, should I give up on this dog or should I continue working with him? And the more I'm involved with our positive training, positive art training, game-based training, the more I think he just needs more time. He's doing it. He's doing the best that he can, but we're also restricted significantly by weather where I live, not because it's cold, but because it's too darn hot and it's difficult to even go anywhere in the car or by ride share or however I get around, or even to walk to the park and play outside because it's 90 by 9 o'clock and that's just too hot for the dogs. And it's something to be, you know, it's a bit frustrating, and you can't go to the mall and play with your play toys with your dog in the mall. They kind of don't like it when you pull out your chasers or your what's the polite word for that toy that I always call the whip?
No, I'm
The
thinking
whip,
for the chuck it. The flirt
no,
pole.
not the chuck it, the flirt pole. When I put, they don't want you to pull out the lunge whip flirt pole and play with your dog
Yeah.
in the middle of the mall.
I haven't done that, but I've pulled out tug toys and played with my
tug toys are a little bit,
hardware stores and things like that.
yeah, but that's,
I've used a tennis ball in a hardware store before.
a tug toy that's this long is a lot different than a lunge whip. But these are things to consider, and you really need trusted people that know what's going on when you're talking about a career change on a dog or a retirement on a dog, so you can make the right decisions for you and the dog. Like right now, if I were to say, okay, I'm done dealing with this public access behavior with Nick, I'm still in the position where I still want to do dog sports. So if I do dog sports, I still have to have him behave. So if I'm going to have him behave, then I still need to work with him on this behavior to fix it. So I'm stuck in a catch-22 with him. He's perfectly capable of doing it. And I just got greeted by, what are you wanting? So I'm stuck in a catch-22 because I really don't want to send him back to the breeder. I really love this dog. He's a good little dog. He behaves really well when he's focused, but, he, as one of my trainers says all the time, where would they send him? Because he's not the easiest dog to handle. So you just have to, look and see you have to ask questions, and you have to be willing to talk to people who are in the know and kind of help you assess the situation. At least that's my opinion.
I
Penny?
would totally agree. I mean, bottom line, it's a personal decision and only you can make that as an owner that's owner training your own service dog. Only the owner and handler can make the decision as to whether it's time or not. But we all go through stages where we go, oh my gosh, what have I gotten into? This dog is driving me crazy. Oh, is it worth all this work? We all go through that. So I think if you can at least find a couple of core group of, whether they're other handlers or dog trainers or somewhere that you feel safe enough to discuss the issue, that can help keep your sanity till you can actually make an educated decision instead of a rash decision.
And
I
Penny,
support my client's decision, no matter what it is, career change or continue working on it, as long as I know they've made that with, with feedback, with education in mind. And that feedback doesn't have to come from me, but feedback from people they trust and feedback from more than just one person, because that's something we may not all agree on. We could discuss ethics all night long for probably 10 hours and find that there's no way we all agree on every single issue every time. We might agree on a lot, but that's the thing with ethics. It's subjectional to our personal experiences. And so we have to think about that and get that kind of, general feedback from some other people. If you were in my shoes, what would you do? Especially to be able to survive the teenage and young adult stages.
and the young adult stage goes, depending on the breed, goes well past, can go well past 2. My breeder told me that her poodles don't settle down till they're at least 3. And thank you. Sorry, I'm being interrupted by a Pyrenees. And knowing that and seeing that we have made progress, it's encouraging to deal with my dog. But there are days I just want to say, okay, either wave a magic wand and get this out of your system, or I threaten him sometimes that I'm sending him back to the breeder. But
he doesn't believe you ever.
Pardon me?
He doesn't believe you ever.
No, he knows better. He knows better because but it's, it becomes one of those things where you really have to ask yourself the question of, so if this dog fails, okay, how bad of a problem is it? Like Poe, there was no choice because she's got a medical problem. So when it's a behavior problem, it's like, okay, is this like the dog is truly psychotic, that there's really a problem that can't be fixed? Because there are dogs that are like that. They're few and far between. Or is this something that can be fixed with a fair amount of work? Is that work worth it? And what's going to happen to the dog if I don't keep the dog? I
think another thing there that we haven't really mentioned yet is also like a liability issue.
Yeah.
What are the chances that this dog, maybe my back is turned, is this dog a bite risk? Because that adds a whole new element we have to
consider. That would be
versus, that's like safety to the public that we already discussed a little bit, but it's just one more thing that we have to add into it. And if
the dog is a bite risk, it's going to be almost impossible to rehome. And in all likelihood, if you don't keep the bite risk dog, the dog is going to be put down. And are you capable of managing the situation of having that dog that's a bite risk at your home?
And that doesn't mean that dog should be out in public places.
It means the dog absolutely should not be out in public places.
Right.
But the question is, how do you manage it? I mean, when I was a kid, we had a Great Dane that after a certain point became a bite risk. And because she tried to eat the neighbor's Pekingese, and my dad had to keep her locked in our garage with bars. He put wooden bars on the windows so she couldn't break out. And we weren't allowed to get her out of the garage while the babysitters were present until he finally decided, not much longer after that, that it was too difficult to manage her and that she needed to be put down because she was having cognitive problems. So there's a lot to think about when it comes to career changing or retiring your dog. It's not just, if it's your active service dog and everything's gone great and you're ready to retire, you're ready to retire them, you've got a new puppy coming up, just phase them out of service. That's not a big deal if they're aging out, versus if you have a dog that either has a behavior or physical problem.
Right. That's when you really have to look at the ethical decisions and make a bottom line. This is the best decision for me and my dog. And that's kind of where we run into the laws aren't specific there. So
no, and under control,
really hard to do a generalized, if you meet A, B, and C criteria, then you can work in public, and if you don't, then you shouldn't, kind of thing. So.
And under control of the handler is not described or defined very well in by the ADA. Yes, Ashlyn?
Ashley.
Yeah. Hi. So I have been diagnosed in the last month with a chronic medical condition that qualifies me for a service dog.
Mhm.
I have a pet dog. He's 6 years old, and I've been training him like obedience training and nose work training and that kind of stuff, just as like a hobby for many years. And so he's very well behaved. And so I've transitioned in the last month, as an owner trainer. And I will be consulting with other professional service dog trainers as we get closer to more public access work. But I live in New York, and so I believe my understanding of the New York law is that if it's a service dog in training, they are allowed public access as long as, all of the other things are met, like they're under handler control, they're not having accidents, they're not creating a disturbance. And
Right.
so I guess my question is so mostly what I've been doing is just taking him to dog friendly places. So like Home Depot, Lowe's, Joann Fabric. Our Joann Fabric is dog friendly.
Most right.
Petco, out working outside my house, working inside my house. I now have him task trained on one task so far. So he's got a lot of really great manners in public. So I guess my question is, at what point would it be, I understand that legally I could probably at this point, because he has one task trained and he's well behaved, I could probably legally go places with him.
Yep.
But I want to be respectful of all of my other handlers out there in the world and know that my dog reflects on all of them as well. And if my dog were to have a bad day and bark or just be a little rowdy or maybe not be feeling well, and so he's not listening as well as he usually would. So I guess at what point do I start trying an outdoor seating restaurant or a grocery store or Target, I guess would be better maybe at first. At what point do I try a short 5-minute, doing some public access training with him in other places?
That's actually a very, very common question. And Cindy, it kind of looked like you were jumping at it. So
I was going to say, you have a task trained service dog. Mm-hmm. And if your dog's well trained to behave at shows and at places like Petco and PetSmart, you're probably ready to start either working or start working on places that are not dog friendly. And you could start at an outdoor eating area. That's the easiest. But you want to transition. If I were you, I would transition before the weather changes into eating indoors, just so your dog knows what it's like to sit in a restaurant. But start with a quieter one, like at an off hours. And so if you need to, you can drip feed while you have your dog where you're going to position your dog. Like everybody puts their dog in a different place. My dog goes between my feet. Other people have them at their side. When I had my Pyrenees working, she'd be usually at my side because she wouldn't fit under the chairs.
Yeah, he's a little bit large, not as large as a Pyrenees, but he's, 70 pounds. So he is a little bit big.
Yeah.
Like off hours, I definitely had that in mind as something, I do try and when we do work out in public to do off hours. And then like, I'll look for an opportunity in the store. I almost feel bad, like I'm stalking people. But if I see like a family with kids, like I'll kind of follow behind them and then like cross another aisle so that they'll walk past us, just so that my dog will have the exposure to a family of kids. But like, it's not a Saturday, at a playground where there's a million kids. It's like one family of kids. So I do try to do the off hours thing.
The playground's actually a good place to train, to teach them to leave the kids alone.
Yeah.
Depending on how busy those playgrounds are.
Yeah.
No, I've totally stalked people before in situations like
Well, I
that.
have two.
So my last service dog had some sound issues that we worked through. And so when winter first started one year, I live in Michigan, so a very, very snowy state. And winter just started, so there was a family of kids wearing the old style, like we know them as moon boots. Younger people may not know that name. But so like kids typically do when they're wearing their heavier winter boots the first time in the year, they kind of shuffle their feet and they make the weird clanking noise. So I noticed right away that this was making my dog a little bit anxious. So we pretty much stalked that family and crossed them multiple times so that I could change her opinion on those boots. She was totally kid friendly and loved kids. So being able to see those kids and, put two and two together that it was just the boots, it's just footwear, no big deal. So yeah, we have totally stalked people like that. And if I notice that I'm passing them more than once, I'll say, hey, I hope you don't mind. I'm doing this for a reason, training. But when it comes to that crossover between pet friendly places and non-pet friendly places, I think you have to go almost looking more at owner comfort. Like you never stop looking at dog comfort, no matter where you are when you work a service dog.
No matter how well trained.
Yeah, you never stop looking at that. But it takes us as owner trainers a while to get comfortable, feeling comfortable taking our dog into public places that are not pet friendly, which I think is kind of where Ashley probably is right now. I remember being there very well.
So do I.
A lot of clients that are at that stage.
And also be aware that your family will probably have issues with taking you and your dog places that are not pet friendly.
Yeah, some do, some don't.
Some do, some don't. I came down to visit my parents from Oregon, and I was going to take my Pyrenees with us to go to In-N-Out Burger. And my mom threw an absolute hissy fit about taking the dog. So we ended up leaving the dog, which I needed for balance a lot at the time. And, she still doesn't like it when I need to take my dog places and I go someplace with her. So it just comes down. But on the other hand, my boyfriend's like, whatever, you mean the dog's coming? Of course the dog's coming, except one time my dog stole a sock and he got banned from the truck for a month or something. But
Yeah,
It-
and everybody's family is different. There's always at least
Mhm.
two in the family that may not be supportive. My husband doesn't like going into restaurants with our service dog, simply because, I mean, he is a husky. There is hair involved, even though he's well groomed. But that's him and part of my husband's OCD. So we generally don't go out to eat he doesn't have the option of leaving the dog home. When it comes to something like that, either my husband can get over it or we just don't go out to eat, which is usually what happens. We end up doing a drive-through if we're going out to eat. But Azul is totally restaurant trained, perfect at staying under the table, has been in tons of restaurants. Even we went on a big camping trip with probably, I think we had 22 people that were all family and that sat at a group table in a very crowded, busy sports bar type restaurant. And Azul was perfectly fine with his downstay under the table because we built up slowly. So I always recommend doing something and because you asked where to start, Ashley, I always recommend doing something like a coffee place, an ice cream place, you know, maybe a bagel
Tap
place
house.
or something, anywhere that you can go in. And if you need to, within 5 minutes, you can leave. And so if your dog is comfortable in the environment and listening to your cues and following your direction, you can stretch that out to a 15-minute session. And if your dog is not uncomfortable in the environment, you can be in and out in less than 5. So
Mhm.
that's kind of one of my go-to starts when you're looking at do you think your dog is ready to start at restaurants? That's where I start at. Can they manage the line? But I've already checked can they manage the line and things like that in my hardware stores and Joann Fabrics and things like that.
Under the table at an outside restaurant,
Right.
and with that, I would do something rather than a sit down place. I would be under a table at an outside restaurant, like fast food. Like here we have tables
Or a picnic table at the park.
Yeah, picnic tables at the park. There's just, are they going to leave the food alone that's dropped? Can they retrieve food if they retrieve? But walking through businesses, I think the first time I was kind of a little bit self-conscious about taking a dog someplace that wasn't dog friendly was going through a grocery store, because I'd taken my pet dogs all kinds of places because I could. And I was used to taking,
because they were pet friendly.
Because they were
You
pet
gotta
friendly.
clarify that.
Yeah, no, not because it wasn't pet friendly, but because I had well-behaved dogs that I could take to pet friendly locations. Well, so training, switching to training a service dog really wasn't that difference with basic behaviors, other than there's some little things I do a little bit different for seating in a restaurant. But going through a grocery store was probably the most, and a few other places that dogs don't go were a little bit nerve-wracking. And what really gets me, and it still bothers me, is the number, and I've learned how to just have selective hearing about it, is the number of people that say, and especially if you have a purebred dog and a well-behaved dog, oh, what a pretty dog. And it really doesn't matter what your dog looks like. If you have a well-behaved dog, you have a pretty dog, you have a gorgeous dog, you have a nice dog, whatever compliment you want to put into that, that's your dog. And I went as far as I changed my dog, and then they start asking you about the service dog stuff. And I changed the conversation from all the service dog questions I was getting to questions about my dog by changing his grooming style. So he's corded, and there's not that many corded poodles around. And so the conversation was switched from questions about my disability or am I training him for somebody or whatever, to oh, that's a really interesting coat. How long did it take? And questions about that. So it's about finding ways to deal with your anxieties and discomforts. But there are people that you will constantly hear comments about, there's a dog in the store. Oh, what a pretty dog. But you're doing right when you get up from a table in a restaurant and you hear, I didn't know there was a dog in here. And I'm sure Penny's heard it. I've heard it. I'm
Mhm.
sure Ria's heard it.
Oh, yeah.
It's, and when you hear that, you just, your chest kind of lifts and,
You feel good.
yeah, that's my dog. I did that, especially with owner training. And it doesn't take much. I mean, once because most dogs, their natural state is resting. And it doesn't take much to get to that comfort state. And once you've been handling and having your dog go everywhere with you, it gets easier. And then people in your area start to know who you are based on your dog. And that's okay too. I'd rather have them know who I am based on my dog. I got told today when I was picked up from a doctor's appointment by the transit driver. He says, I asked him if he was here for me, and he said, no, I'm here for Nick. I said, oh, well, what did I say? I'm his service person. He says, oh, okay, well, then you can come along.
Yeah, it's funny. I do a lot of training in Home Depot when I have a young dog because that's one of the few big stores. So if you look at big stores in my rural environment, I have Home Depot or Walmart. Of course, Home Depot in our area is pet friendly. Walmart is not. And Walmart is like one of my last. I say, don't take your dog in training to Walmart until you are sure they are ready, because all horror stories start in Walmart. And that's the absolute last place you test a dog.
That's
After
why it has the nickname Hellmark.
everything else. But so those are my two options for bigger environments. So I do a lot of training at Home Depot. So they've actually seen Azul from the time that he was probably 4 months old. And by they, I mean the staff and employees at Home Depot until now. And they see him at least twice a month. And when he was younger, it was more like at least once or twice a week. And if I'm taking a new training client in there, we might be there more frequently for a little while again now. But so they all know him by name, almost every single staff person. And they all know that a certain look on my face, or when I'm asking him to focus or we're doing a specific training, they leave us alone. And if we're more relaxed or like on our way out the door, that's when we will stop and let people greet him, because Azul loves that. And that's one of his motivators. So, I mean, they've all known that as well. And so having that kind of relationship with the local people that they know, and they've watched his training and they've seen it grow. And then they've been able to also help me train additional things. And that's when I know, like, was I ready to move from the pet friendly environment of Home Depot to a non-pet friendly environment, say a clothing store or something that doesn't have food involved, because those are like my next kind of smaller go-to environment. Or a Family Dollar, Dollar General, something to that aspect that might have a refrigerator section, but not open food. And so I did that when the staff started saying, he's so close, he's really good, he seems perfect when he's in here. I wish my dog acted like that, kind of thing. When you start hearing those compliments in pet-friendly places and there it's actually held, that's when I move into the non-pet friendly places, as long as you're doing it slowly and wisely and increasing over time and comfort level of your dog.
Penny, Ria wanted to say something.
Yep, go ahead.
Okay. I told you I'd be late. I was at a canine demonstration that the different police departments put on. I didn't know about it till an hour before this was supposed to start.
Mhm.
What made me think of it was a lady seated next to me, and I don't know if it was an ESA or a service dog. It wasn't labeled. Anyway, she had a small, I'd say it was Yorkie Terrier mix on a dog bed in her lap. And we've talked before about sometimes it's not so much can you bring your dog, but should you sometimes. And when you have a bunch of police canines that are very ramped up emotionally, sometimes it's not a good idea to bring a dog into that
Especially,
setting.
especially a terrier.
We've
Yeah.
actually talked a lot about that, that fine line of is it a good idea kind of thing, but that brings up a very another point, and that's something
But
actually considered.
let me finish, please. So that dog actually behaved pretty well, but it was really hard on the Malinois. I don't know the plural of that, because they were already very amped up. And she kept, when they were out in the lobby area, she kept walking past them with this little dog on a bed that wasn't on a leash. Anyway, and they would go nuts, literally, because they were all ready to do their thing.
They thought it was dinner.
Yeah, pretty much. And
Yeah,
I wanted so badly to say something to her, but it's also not my place to call that person out. It would have
right.
been her place to do
Something
that.
the police should have said.
But
I think, it's a fine line there. I have actually been kind of wondering about a similar situation. Well, okay, so we get in very rural environment, have very, very few working dogs in this community. But there is an officer he's a school liaison officer with a working dog. And so that dog is in the school all the time. And then I also know that that school has a visiting therapy dog. And I know that they work well, very well, being in the same building and ignoring each other because they've been trained to do that. So this officer has put on demonstrations before that I've wanted to go see the demonstration, but I'm not going without my service dog generally. So, but me, as comfortable as I am using my service dog, as much as I know about canine officers, in the whole police department kind of setup, I would not take my service dog to an event like that without prior consent from those officers.
No,
Just because you don't know what it's going to do to that dog. They're trying to do a training for the general public. And if my dog is distracting that, granted, their dog should be trained to a standard where another dog isn't distracting. But I don't want to set their dog up to fail any more than I want to set my service dog up to fail.
and their dogs, the other thing to think about that is those dogs are bite trained,
yeah,
and
Right.
that's a whole nother level of liability. If something happened to our dog as a result of whatever either dog did, if Nick got pissy with one of theirs, you don't know what's going to happen. And I always make a point to try and stay away from the working canines that the police have, or any kind of working canine that's being used for law enforcement, because I don't know how well the dog is trained. I don't know how mentally sound the dog is. We recently had one of our local canine law enforcement officers put down at gunpoint because it had latched on to the officer that was handling it, that was taking it to get humanely euthanized for biting its actual handler. So I don't 100% trust bite trained dogs. And if I'm going up to get my dog socialized to law enforcement, the canine officer is, if it's only a canine officer, it's the last choice. And they don't want your dog around their dogs. When I was in Atwater at the air show, the Merced County sheriffs had the Malinois locked in the air-conditioned truck, and they had the sniffer dog out because they didn't want, the guy that was handling the Malinois didn't want it interacting with the public.
Yeah, it's a totally different setting. These guys, and they admitted it when you watched them working with the bite suits. And they have a bite force, I think he said between 400 and 600 pounds, and it leaves bruises even through the bite suit.
Oh, yeah.
And watching them work with them close up like that, even when they call them off, sometimes they literally have to drag them off.
Oh, yeah.
And I wouldn't take a dog anywhere near that, you know?
Oh, I mean, I was around a Malinois all weekend that I trust. Like, I'm around it on a regular basis, and it's obedience trained. And that dog is, let's just say, I will not be getting a Malinois anytime soon, and anybody, I would not recommend a Malinois for any service dog handler, just because
I've always
they're,
wanted one, but I don't think I could do it anymore.
now my boyfriend has one, and it's neurotic, but it's neurotic in a different way. It's just skittish of everything. But once you train them, you give them the confidence and you train them, they're still neurotic, but they're just like, I want to, it's like, I want
They
to eat.
never stop, yeah.
So I don't know if you ever saw the thing I shared with the different breeds, and they showed the German Shepherd, and then the Malinois just like skipping
Yep.
and jumping all over everything.
Yep. And the Pomeranian kind of just hits it with a purse and yeah.
Yeah.
But
Okay, so
I don't
Ashley
want to like
dropped out.
focus just on police dogs. Yeah, I saw that. She had to leave, which I understand.
Yep.
But I want to be considerate of any time there's working dogs. So another common situation, because one of my clients and dear friends has a therapy dog that works in an advocacy center. And so if I needed to go to that center for services, I would want to make sure that precautions were in place before taking my dog into any kind of business or place where I know there's another working dog. So it only takes a moment, a phone call, an email, something ahead of time to say, look, I have a service dog and I know you have a dog that works in the building. What do you recommend? Like, my dog will ignore that dog. However, if that dog's not used to other dogs coming into their home turf kind of thing, and the same could be true with business shop dogs.
Yeah, I was just gonna bring shop dogs up.
Yeah, you may have ADA law telling you you can take your dog into that business, but is it worth it to put your dog, subject your dog to possible attack from a shop dog that may not have the training, or a facility dog that may not have the training? So common courtesy is, hey, I'm coming. I want to buy something from you. Can you put your dog in a safe place so that I can bring my service dog in? Or will your dog ignore my service dog?
So Penny, how would you deal with this situation? Because I was going to go take my dog there just because the guy was a jerk. So there was a guy in Lodi that had a bookshop, an antique or a used bookshop, and I guess he had cats in his bookshop. And he denied access to a lady with a service dog because his cats would urinate all over the books. I say at that point, it's his problem if his cats are causing the damage to the books.
It's kind of that fine line. I don't want to do anything that's going to stress out another animal. So
I don't either, but
I get that. And I understand the wanting to prove a point. These are service dogs that need to have access. But so personal, completely not bashing somebody else, because this is my son-in-law. My son-in-law owns a petting zoo that he takes around to various places, some of those being pet-friendly places, some of those being non-pet-friendly places.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, there could be service dogs around as well. Now, my service dog, also being a member of the family and acts like a total pet at home, can go and be around his animals and run off leash, and like the animals are trained for it, so it doesn't stress the animal out.
Right.
For a public situation where there's a dog that doesn't know those animals, and every dog does smell different, so another dog could stress out those animals if that dog was having fear signs of an animal. So when they do something like that and there's a service dog, they have to warn them that they need to stay back at a, a safe,
Reasonable.
might be greater than the distance that general kids and people without a dog could approach. And I think that kind of boils down to the ethical. Yes, I have permission to take my service dog in most special events like that, because I'm not talking about like a farm or something that can actually deny
Well,
if it has
actually,
an
I
effect on
think
the animals.
I think if you're at like a petting zoo like that, they can deny you access because
If you're visiting their facility, they can. In his particular case, he's taking his animals out to a public event. So
you
he
can't stay.
really have that call. He can stop them from interacting with the animals. He can stop them from taking them inside the animal pens.
But he can't stop them from walking
being
out.
at the event.
Well, not at the event, but like, so like zoos can stop you from taking your dogs by the
Right.
big cats and the alligators and the monkeys.
Right.
Which are the usual ones, but
Any
probably
place that your animal is going to cause
cause a problem or be
hardship
endangered.
on the other animals present.
Right. But with petting zoos, with farm animals, I would hope that the farm animals are used to dogs on some level because most farms have dogs. But on the other hand, not all dogs have been around farm animals.
Correct. And
You know,
that's where it
good
boils
Lord.
down to for my son-in-law is, yes, Azul can be in that environment because he's grown up around these animals. And even if we go see him in a new environment, a special event, they're the same animals and the same smells. And he knows Azul is going to maintain his manners and not show any aggressive or fearful nature
right.
to those animals. He might be overexcited when he recognizes the donkey that he loves to play with, but he's not going to be fearful or aggressive. Versus even one of you who has a well-trained dog, but doesn't know those particular animals, might accidentally have that aggressive tendency if they get scared by a donkey they've never seen. I don't know what you
My
guys
dogs
know
are
about
good.
donkeys, but donkeys are by nature trained to chase away predatory animals from livestock. So
Right.
anybody that has a herd out in the middle of nowhere generally will have a donkey in the herd because that will chase away coyotes and whatnot.
So a donkey, a Great Pyrenees, or
Right.
a llama, not an alpaca.
So you put that donkey in the petting zoo, which I mean, he has miniature donkeys, but they're still donkeys.
They're still donkeys.
So you put them in a petting zoo, and then you have an animal that's fearful, even if that animal isn't barking, snarling, growling towards the pack animals, those petting zoo animals. If it's fearful, the donkey senses that fear and is going to be more protective over his animals. And then in his attempt to try to protect from the dog, could then unintentionally run into a child or something in that situation, even though the donkey's not doing anything more than focusing on something that's fearful versus focusing on the kids that it would normally be focused on. So it's kind of that fine line of, is it ethical to take your dog close enough in that environment?
Well, I don't take either of my dogs over to my sister's house, except unless he's invited, because she's got horses that are 17 hands, several of them. And they're not exactly the calmest beasts on the planet. You're lucky if they have 4 feet on the ground. It's usually 2 feet and sometimes less. And I was down at my niece's and her horse was kicking the barn roof. So that's the nature of their beasts. So I don't take my dog over there because I don't want him kicked in the head and killed.
Oh,
Well,
And-
and that, if it's gonna stress out the animals there.
Well, right, exactly. And,
That's
you
the
know, we're-
ethical choice we have to make.
that's it. You know, and also by right, I don't have the right to take my dog on private property unless he's invited. You
Right,
know, and one of the things that came up last fall, Ken and I went to a barbecue up on the way up to Yosemite at his financial planner's ranch. It's this really, really nice ranch. I mean, gorgeous ranch. And they had a nice tri-tip barbecue for us, and then we got to watch them. He rides broncs. So he had a bunch of bronc riders from Fresno State out there, and one guy from Cal Poly. And they were doing the bronc riding. Well, I intentionally did not take my dog, and I used a service human because it was a private ranch. Even though it was a public event, it was a private event. I mean, it wasn't a public event, it was a private ranch, and it was a private by invite only event.
right.
So I didn't feel I had the right to inflict my service dog on their property, even though there were other
Right.
dogs on the property.
well, and that's just it, you know, my son-in-law is very gracious with letting my dogs on there. We actually use it sometimes for like the newer animals
Mhm.
he buys before he takes them out to a show. It's good to see how they respond to my dog, knowing how my dog's going to respond to the animals there. And they used to have a dog until he passed away due to old age. So same thing there. But for me to take in another dog could be very, very stressful to the animals, even though he's very, very gracious and allows me to do that with the dogs that I train in that area. He
Right.
doesn't want to, and I wouldn't be upset if he didn't want that. But
I know
he's
I've taken
lover and
Shasta,
open to it.
I've taken Shasta to 2 Buck Brannaman horse clinics where he was teaching people how to move cattle. And I asked permission. I didn't just take it because, like you said, it's on a private ranch.
But
And
is it by invite only, or or is it a paid?
it's a paid thing, but I thought it was polite to ask because there's a lot of livestock and horses.
Yeah,
It's a
And there's
working
ranch
ranch.
dogs.
You want to be polite.
Yeah, and there's ranch dogs that are off leash too,
yeah.
and so they allowed it. They said, "What will you do if your dog doesn't want to behave?" And I said, "We'll leave." I mean, what else are you going to say? And I kept her on a waist leash because Shasta could be reactive to different things, but she actually did really well. Now, Guinness, would I take him to one? Absolutely not. He's not good with cattle. We found that out almost immediately, and we tried the desensitization and all that, and he never got past I'm going to growl it and lunge at cattle, and so no, I would not take him to that ever.
Yeah.
It
It
is
just
a case
depends-
by case, dog by dog situation. The animals that are there, you have to watch for stress. That's part of working a service dog.
Mhm.
And I would not.
Dog
And it's part of knowing your dog. But, that's as they get older, or, that's as they're maturing more. Once they get past a year, you have a much better idea of what your dog can and cannot handle. And
He doesn't do cattle.
well, like Nick, I knew when we took him at a little over a year to Hoover Dam, I knew he was going to do fine. And when we took him up to Yosemite, I knew he was going to do fine. But it's just a matter of, knowing what your dog's, what's going to really stress them out versus what's going to kind of stress them out versus, what's going to relax him. Nick likes the back of his ears rubbed.
Yeah.
Poe dislikes food. If you haven't noticed, she's been demanding. She's
So
looking at me
we
like,
have definitely hit our hour mark. I know we
I
started
think-
late,
yeah,
but
I'm gonna stop the recording. And we can, if we need to, we can always do this do more another night. I think it's a good topic.
It is.
And
I think it is too. It'd be
I
nice.
think
to
there's
get
more to
people, but-
discuss about it, especially if we get more people. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop this.
Sorry, I came in